Israel is a nation at war across multiple fronts. To the north in Lebanon, a major escalation, airstrikes and threatening text messages that have forced people from their homes. To the south in Gaza, a dark proposal to lay siege to the northern half of the Strip and ethnically cleanse the Palestinians there. And online, the activist influencers pushing Israeli propaganda. The Middle East is trapped in a spiraling crisis. For almost a year, Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon have waged a low-grade war against each other. In the past couple of weeks, that war metastasized. Thousands of Lebanese in the south of the country have been forced from their homes as Israeli bombardment has intensified. More than 750 have been killed, around 600 of them in this past week alone. Alongside airstrikes and preparations for a land invasion, there is an element of psychological pressure exerted by Israel through menacing videos and threatening text messages disguised as humanitarian warnings to leave the war zone. And then there's Israel's repetition of the same narratives we've heard through the genocide in Gaza. Human shields, Israel's right to self-defense at any cost. As the violence and the rhetoric dials up, each act of aggression increases the risk of a war that engulfs the region. This is a horror film the Lebanese have seen before. Dystopian videos purporting to show homes packed with hidden Hezbollah weaponry, making the case that civilian dwellings are legitimate targets for the Israeli military. It's a narrative that has long been part of the Israeli script in multiple wars waged over decades. A form of psychological warfare designed to terrorize people and manufacture consent for war. It has been used infinite times in the genocidal campaign on Gaza alone. This Israeli-produced cartoon telling people they had missiles in their showers and rocket launchers in their garages. It was sent to Lebanese mobile phones and posted on social media just this past week. People were told to leave if they didn't want to die in the bombing of their area.
In Lebanon, in the last few days, there were over 80,000 messages sent to people telling them, evacuate your home immediately because we're going to attack. You're living in a vicinity where Hezbollah fighters are hiding weapons. The Minister of Communication actually received a message on his own mobile telling him to evacuate his office in the Ministry of Information because Hezbollah is hiding weaponry. The Minister of Culture received the same message.
So Lebanese have lived through this drama before. It feels like deja vu to us. We're really accustomed to Israel's propaganda efforts, and we know that most of Israel's communications during the war are basically instill fear in the people. Lebanese are used to getting these kind of warnings to leave your village, and these are kind of ridiculous. Just because you're notifying somebody about bombing their house doesn't mean you're justified in doing it.
The IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. What
often happens is that the bombs land on hospitals, schools, residential homes. They have nothing to do with Hezbollah. So the feeling among people is that these bombings are not targeted, that they are quite indiscriminate.
There's a long history and a big chunk of geopolitical context that forms the backdrop to the current Israel-Lebanon war. Hezbollah, the Lebanese paramilitary and political group that Israel says it is targeting, came into being around 40 years ago, following the 1982 Israeli invasion and occupation of parts of Lebanon. The group has the military and financial backing of Iran, Israel's sworn enemy in the region. For the past 12 months, Hezbollah and Israel have been firing rockets at each other, strikes that have been indiscriminate in both directions. Israel says Hezbollah is to blame for the escalation. That claim, however, crumbles under scrutiny.
If you look at actual information on the ground, since October, over 80% of the attacks between Hezbollah and Israel have been carried out by Israel. Yet if you look at the way that this issue is framed in the media, you would think that Hezbollah has carried out more attacks, or at the very least, that Hezbollah has carried out an equal amount of attacks.
A lot of the media are taking October 7th as the beginning point, but it really depends on what timeline you choose, because a lot of things were happening on October 5th. A lot of things have been happening in many Octobers. For decades, Lebanese and Palestinians have been occupied, they have been killed, they have been displaced. This has been a conflict that has claimed the lives of thousands of Lebanese and Palestinians over the years. And there has always been, a resistance to Israel's occupation. What we feel in Lebanon and most of the Middle East, that Israel has a blank check, is not accountable.
The chaos and destruction inflicted by Israel on Lebanon spiked this month. 2 weeks ago, dozens of sabotaged pagers and walkie-talkies, supposedly all belonging to Hezbollah militants, exploded simultaneously across the country. It left nearly 40 dead and thousands seriously injured. In the bombardments that Israel has carried out since then, more than 500,000 Lebanese have been forced to leave their homes, and nearly 600 people have been killed. Those seeking the Israeli rationale for this level of violence have been handed a particularly twisted logic from the Netanyahu government.
What the Israeli government is saying is de-escalation through escalation.
Ori Goldberg is a scholar tracking the propaganda wars from inside Israel. Since Al Jazeera is banned from operating within his country, we spoke with Goldberg over Zoom.
Israel repeatedly states that it seeks de-escalation through escalation. Anybody who hears that argument knows immediately that it's insane. But in Israel's universe, it has meaning and it has logic. And the logic is that Israel operates according to its own rules. The only thing that matters to Israel is the ability to pursue its sacred duty, which is defending Jews and maintaining Israeli security. And if that's the case, if you're only operating according to your own rules, then the only option you have is escalation. The notion of de-escalation is not a feature that we have. So we escalate to make sure our rivals understand the point. We escalate to de-escalate.
In what they called a proactive offensive operation against Hezbollah.
Western media coverage of the crisis in the Middle East has had a strange quality to it. Israel's attacks are narrated in passive voice. Forced expulsions are dressed up as evacuations. Large-scale offensives are called targeted operations. And government talking points justify nearly every assault on Palestinians. This framing has predictably spilled over into the coverage of Israel's rampage in Lebanon. The most telling moments came following the device explosions.
Tactically, what Israel has done has been brilliant. They have severely degraded Hezbollah's capabilities.
Much of the Western reportage went all in on the sophistication and cunning of Israel's cyber warfare capabilities. Details were light on the devastation and paranoia it unleashed in Lebanon. Days after the attack, in a rare media moment, a lone Western voice called the incident what it was, an act of terror. It wasn't a left-wing politician or a human rights activist. The man saying Israel had orchestrated a terror attack was former CIA director Leon Panetta.
I don't think there's any question that it's a form of terrorism.
The significance of a former CIA director calling Israel's attacks terrorism is that that exact language is entirely erased from the way that the mainstream media has covered those attacks. We've seen headlines that call them pager attacks or Hezbollah pager explosions, as if there's just devices that are randomly exploding of their own accord, and not that they are being detonated by Israel in an operation.
I think the problem in these kind of statements come from the fact that we always hear it from the former CIA operative, former Mossad operative, former IDF officers. It's always the former. We actually don't hear it from people who have the power to do something about it. That is a sad reality that we are living in.
1 year on since the 7th of October 2023, the Israeli war machine is in overdrive. Nothing has reigned in Netanyahu and his far-right government. Not the grieving families of Israeli captives demanding a ceasefire for the sake of their loved ones. Not the condemnation of rights and aid organizations. Not the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, or the International Criminal Court. Israel has wrapped its wars in the flag of self-defense. Backed by key Western allies and key media outlets, it has successfully dragged the Middle East deeper and deeper into a bloody quagmire.
Israel has spun out of control. Our arguments are vacuous. They're hollow. We're not safeguarding Israeli lives. We're not fighting terrorism. We're not improving security. We're basically invested in a pile of hot air. Now, if you're going to try and sell the hot air as a real plan or a real argument, then you're going to, by definition, have to be more and more noisy, and more deadly, and more in everybody's face, because there's no substance there. It's all based on your ability to be as loud and as obnoxious as possible. The best analogy I can think of is think of an amplifier. Think of somebody constantly turning up the volume more and more and more. At some point, the amplifier is going to be fried. And once that happens, we're going to reach a situation where nobody believes Israel. And then we'll be royally screwed.
In Gaza, a terrifying new plan is gaining traction among influential figures in Israel. It would lay siege to all of northern Gaza. Tariq Nafi has the details.
Mina, this is essentially a blueprint to forcibly expel hundreds of thousands of civilians from northern Gaza, then starve or kill anyone who remains. It's called the General's Plan. Its principal architect is this man, former General Eiland. He's been one of the most prominent faces in the Israeli media since October 7th, where he's made all sorts of genocidal statements. The problem Eiland wants to solve is that after 1 year of waging war on Gaza, the Israeli military is yet to achieve its key objective, dismantling Hamas. So 3 weeks ago, Eiland released this proposal.
300,000 התושבים שנשארו בצפון הרצועה. אנחנו מורים לכם לצאת מצפון הרצועה, אבל בעוד שבוע כל השטח של צפון הרצועה הופך להיות לשטח צבאי. והשטח הצבאי הזה מבחינתנו לא תיכנס אליו שום אספקה. ואכן 5,000 מחבלים שנמצאים בשטח הזה יוכלו במצב הזה או להיכנע או למות ברעב.
In a document outlining the plan, the former general says that after Hamas surrenders, it would be possible to go into Gaza City and, quote, purify the area. This idea, of course, has a name that Eiland doesn't want to use, ethnic cleansing. Since October 7th, we've heard countless examples of this kind of rhetoric in the Israeli media. Commentators, including current and former officials, calling for Gaza to be wiped off the map. What makes this more serious is how aggressively the General's Plan is being promoted by key voices in the media. Billboards advocating the plan have popped up in Tel Aviv. Members of the Israeli Knesset from across the political spectrum have chimed in with their support.
אז אני חושבת שהתוכנית שגיורא הציג כאן והאלופים האחרים היא מאוד חכמה, היא קובעת כללי משחק ברורים, צריך לעשות אותה.
And this week we learned that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now considering the plan. According to national broadcaster Khan, Netanyahu is quoted as saying, "It makes sense."
Thanks, Tariq. Hasbara, the Hebrew word that translates to explanation, persuasion, has been a central strategy of the Zionist movement since well before the founding of the State of Israel. It's taken the form of media-trained government spokespeople delivering sound bites on TV, PR campaigns advertising the Israeli army not just as moral but also cool, tours of illegal settlements, and extensive messaging on social media. From hashtags to ads on YouTube, Israel's online push has been aimed at the smartphone generation. Young people, especially those in the Western world, whose governments fund and support Israel. Online influencers have been key to this campaign, and for the past 12 months, the followings of these activist influencers has surged, and their role in Israel's Hasbara machine has grown. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on the work of online Hasbarists and how the genocide in Gaza has made their jobs a lot more challenging.
This AI-generated image went viral back in May. It was reshared more than 46 million times across social media platforms, a symbol of solidarity with Palestinians following a horrific Israeli bombing in the southern Gaza city of Rafah.
One of the deadliest bombings in Rafah of the entire war.
People were burned alive in their tents.
What Israel said was a tragic mistake was widely seen as the work of a careless military at best and a deliberate strategy of mass murder at worst. In a parallel narrative universe, however, the online anguish and outrage and that viral image They were the problem, not Israel's bombing.
That if Hitler had an Instagram account, far more many Jews would have been killed in the Holocaust. People are just sharing content irresponsibly and saying, all eyes on Rafah. Where were your eyes since the 7th of October?
This is Hen Mazzig, one of a league of online influencers who say they speak for the cause of Zionism.
When things escalated in Rafah, I think that a lot of us were afraid because people are susceptible to misinformation that is being directed at Israel and at Jewish people. So often when we see hate speech about Israel, it's hidden in a facade of criticism, but it's not really criticism to call Israelis baby killers. That's an anti-Semitic trope from the Middle Ages. To say that the Jewish state is targeting civilians, it's an anti-Semitic trope. So I think that's why a lot of Jewish people specifically were really concerned to see this unfolding.
Israel's assault on Rafah continued in defiance of an order from the International Court of Justice. Today, Rafah lies in ruins. However, Zionist influencers argue that Israel is under pressure in a way it has never been before, and that the country and its actions are chronically misunderstood.
We've been made to believe that we're wrong when we're not. We're definitely not.
Mazzig has nearly 550,000 social media followers. He writes op-eds, is frequently seen on TV, and delivers speeches, including at university campuses where so much activism takes place for both Israel and Palestine. Mazzig is part of a new breed of pro-Israeli activists doing what is called Hezbollah. It's the Hebrew word for explanation, and it's what the Israeli state calls public diplomacy.
The thing about Hezbollah is that it's something that the Israeli state has used for decades to address itself to a liberal or progressive Western audience.
The IDF does exactly what you would expect of a professional army of a democratic state.
And what's happened as Israel has kind of revealed itself increasingly to the rest of the world, at no time more so than during the genocide in Gaza, it has needed to work harder and harder to keep trying to co-opt these same Western liberal progressive audiences.
Jewish women come from a long lineage of strong women. And now I'm about to meet the first ever female-led operational tank unit.
Israel has always had a strong Hezbollah effort on social media. They have to propagandize and justify their massacre on the world stage. They are no longer trying to sell a series of military checkpoints or seemingly contested apartheid or a daily blockade of Gaza that lasted 16 years and continues. What they are trying to sell right now is a full-blown genocide.
In the past year of the war on Gaza, online Hezbollah has been in overdrive. In the first 2 weeks of the war alone, Israel spent $7.1 million on YouTube ads.
Armed Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Israel via a ground invasion.
Israel's Directorate of Public Diplomacy, an arm of the Prime Minister's office, has made a big play for celebrity influencers to present the state's position to foreign audiences. American actress Julia Hart was invited to meet Israeli President Isaac Herzog.
Hamas goes underground to kill. Israel goes underground to feed, to save.
There's also US actor Michael Rappaport.
Good evening to the millions of viewers at home and the 134 Israeli hostages who are watching us from the Hamas tunnels in Gaza.
Another personality is Mossab Hassan Youssef, a Palestinian Zionist known in the West as the son of Hamas, since his father was a founding member of the group. Both Rappaport and Youssef have joined Israel's post-war Hezbollah campaigns for a more polished, globally acceptable set of Zionist voices. A new class of online Hezbollahist has emerged during this war.
So, pro-Israel social media influencers like Hen Mazzig, like Noah Tishby, like Nusayr Yassin, the creator of Nas Daily, none of them really claim that they work directly for the Israeli government. They are propagandists, but ultimately they distance themselves from the Israeli government.
They are Zionists. They believe in the ethno-nationalist project, and they believe that people are just Jew haters. And they serve the purpose of convincing not people who are pro-Palestine, but of convincing other Jews, especially in the West, that people hate us and people are lying about us. It is our job to stop it by spreading the truth about Israel. And that truth is something you can find right here on my social media feed.
They are working to kind of appeal to a Western demographic that they're mirroring back in a way. Queer people in the Western world may look for somebody who's queer in Israel, or women in the Western world can look at somebody like Tishby and say, oh look, there's an Israeli woman, she's like me.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Pride from my city of Tel Aviv.
So we look at the video of Tishby speaking at the Pride Festival in Tel Aviv.
Are you proud to be gay? Are you proud to be Jewish? Are you proud to be Zionist?
What she's trying to do is say to be Zionist is to be progressive and liberal and tolerant and open. And what's being implied there is that the Arab world is homophobic, is repressive. Of course, the irony here is, as soon as you go 5 minutes away from Tel Aviv, you're in a much more forbidding, in this case, Jewish fundamentalist hinterland of the Israeli state, where homophobia is rife, as rife as it is anywhere in the rest of the world, if not more so.
Throughout the war on Gaza, the narratives from Israel's spokespeople, both official and unofficial, have been challenged by images and reports from within the war zone. While international journalists have been locked out by Israel, Palestinian journalists have been relentless, and their reports have been corroborated by humanitarian workers and doctors who have emerged from the strip with horrific accounts of a genocide in progress. This network has provided the kind of coverage of this war that no other media outlet has. It's what led to Al Jazeera being banned in Israel in May this year. It's the reason why so many Israeli spokespeople accuse this channel of being pro-Hamas. And it's why Mazig was very anxious about speaking to us for this report.
I'm aware of how some of my comments might be distorted, but it was important for me to come and speak to you because I was hoping that at least you'll give a fair representation. And I know Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar, but it's still important for me to try and give you the benefit of the doubt that I hope you would represent my message. It is a message about unity, unity of Israelis, Palestinians, unity of the entire Middle East, and peace.
I think the job of being an Israeli Hezbollah since the 7th has been a Sisyphean task. And that's because Israel has made it impossible for them to succeed in their PR efforts. You can't have day after day, tragedy after tragedy that goes live on social media and then is celebrated by Israelis on their own platforms, and then have somebody say, oh, no, Israel's good and Israel is doing its best.
So even though the progressive, liberal Hasbarists are trying to present this alternate image to the Western world, they're facing a competition that they can't win because the gruesome reality of what the Israelis are doing in Gaza is far more powerful in terms of narrative, in terms of image, in terms of video, in terms of sound even. You can't turn that off. Once you've seen those sites, you can't make them go away.
And finally, it's been just over a week since a group of heavily armed Israeli soldiers forced their way into Al Jazeera's Ramallah bureau in the occupied West Bank and ordered the network to shut down its operations there. Israel used an emergency law dating back to 1945, the time of the British mandate in Palestine, to force the bureau shut. Many of our colleagues in Ramallah had feared this was coming, especially after an earlier ban back in May on Al Jazeera's reporting from inside Israel. Nonetheless, this is a significant escalation against the network designed to make it impossible to report on Israel's actions. Al Jazeera's coverage continues, though, even with the restrictions. You'll see our correspondents are stationed in Jordan for now. What's clear is that the continuing effort to silence the network and to target Palestinian journalists across the occupied territories is an affront to the democracy that Israel says it is and that its Western allies claim to be protecting. We'll see you next time. Here are the Listening Post.